Hi, I am Femin Dharamshi and I'm here to tell you 5 mistakes that you need to avoid as a programmer. Now, if you're a beginner, I'm pretty sure you're doing at least one of these mistakes because I did too. So let's get started. The first thing that almost everyone tends to do is logging unnecessary output. Now, why is this wrong? This is wrong because logging statements in your code will make your code longer, messier, and difficult to read. Let's understand this with an example. Now, as you can see in this example, we have 3 functions. The main function, which is obviously the driver function that calls all the other functions. The sum function that calculates the sum of 2 numbers, and the multiply function that calculates the product of 2 numbers. Now, we have 6 print statements here. But do we really need all the 6? The answer is no. These are redundant. On simplification, as you can see, the code looks much cleaner and readable. Now here, there are only 2 print statements, whereas the remaining 4 were not required. So you see, this is how you can make your code more readable and less messier. Next, we must use if-else statements instead of multiple if statements wherever possible. You want to know why? Let's consider a code snippet with multiple if statements. Now if the value of a is 1, on execution, the code first checks if the value of a is 1, which is true. So it enters the body and executes the statements, which here is a print statement. Then the control goes to the next if statement and checks if the value of a is 2. The result is false, so it does not enter the body. Next, it does the same process for 3 and 4. After that, it executes the rest of the code. Now let's see the code snippet using if-else. On execution, the code first checks if the value of a is 1, which is true, and hence it executes its body. Then it ignores all the other conditions and directly goes to the rest of the code. Efficient, right? This is why we should avoid using multiple if statements. The third thing to avoid is putting a lot of code in one single file. Now, if you have ever worked with Flutter, you already know why this is important. Let me explain this with the help of an example. In this code snippet, you can see there are 6 functions and a controller function that calls these functions. In a real-world application, there might be more than 100 functions to work with. Let's say you've put all these functions in one file like this. Now there's a bug. Imagine going through thousands of lines of code to find that bug. It would be a nightmare, right? Let's see how we can save ourselves from that. Firstly, we make one file where we write the code for a controller. Next, we create different files for each functionality. So here we have put each function in a different file. Next, import these files in the controller and let the controller call these functions. Now let's say the problem arises in function 4. So you just have to work with those few lines of code in the file that contains function 4 and nothing else. Makes your life easier, right? This helps a lot while developing Flutter applications with its enormous widget tree. You can divide the widgets into multiple files with descriptive names, so when you open your project after a few months, you can easily get back to working on it without taking ages to figure out the code. Let's look at the next mistake that is very frequently made while developing real-world applications. As new developers, we tend to use lists everywhere, but lists are not always efficient. We must use appropriate data structures according to the use case. Let's look at an example. We have a data model class on the left that takes an ID and a name and has a constructor to set those values. On the right, we have a class that uses the data model. Now here, the code snippet uses a list to keep a track of all the objects of the class user record. Now if you want to find a particular object using the ID, we must traverse through the whole list where the time complexity increases, and this approach is not efficient. A better way to do this would be using a hash map, where you store the user record object using a key value pair, and the key here would be the ID of the record. Now if you want to find an object, all you need to do is access the value for the key, which is the ID in the hash map. The average case time complexity of a hash map search operation is big O of 1. Here we come to the last mistake that we are going to discuss in this video. In a latest survey, it is shown that 60% of the code on GitHub is unnecessary. Pushing sensitive and unnecessary data to our GitHub repository is one thing that we must definitely avoid. Wait, are you already using GitHub? If you're not, then that's the biggest mistake you're making. Create a GitHub account now and put all your projects up there. Okay, so let's look at what are these things that we should not put in our GitHub repository. Node modules, the modules that you install using npm or yarn, secret keys, API keys, which are sensitive information, the database passwords. Avoid putting these in your GitHub repository. To make this simpler, you can create a file and store all such sensitive information in it, and then make an entry for this file in the .gitignore file. It will then automatically ignore these files while pushing to the repository. That's it for this video. I hope you liked the content. Please drop a like and subscribe for more videos. And don't forget to check out my Instagram page, Beyond Hello World.